My name is Emily Dawson. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd have to bury my child alone. I never thought that out of all the people in the world, my own parents, the ones who raised me, the ones who saw me take my first steps and whispered bedtime stories in my ear, would be the ones who didn't show up when I needed them most. But they didn't. They didn't come to Eliana's funeral. Not even for 5 minutes, not even to hold my hand or say goodbye. Instead, they went to my brother's pool party. Yes, you heard that right. While I stood next to a coffin so small it barely fit the bouquet I brought for my baby girl, my parents were popping champagne in Jason's backyard, smiling for photos, and bragging about the new hot tub he installed, just in time for his birthday bash. I can still hear the laughter in the background of the video someone posted that day. It autoplayed on my phone while I was sitting in my car after the service, too numb to cry, too broken to scream. My father's voice deep and jovial echoed through the speakers, "Let's get this party started." And just like that, my silence shattered. I'd held it in for 2 long years, really. Years of being second to Jason. Years of being the good daughter, the quiet one, who never asked for much, who learned not to cry too loud, not to expect too much, not to be a burden. I did everything right. I got good grades. I worked hard. I didn't get into trouble. I stayed out of the spotlight because, well, the spotlight already had someone in it. Jason Dawson. The golden child. The pride of the family. The one who could do no wrong, even when he did plenty of wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back a little. Let me tell you who I was before the heartbreak, before the betrayal. Before I became the woman you're about to meet, the one who decided that being quiet wasn't going to work anymore. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just rows of white porches and neighbors who knew your business before you did. My mom, Donna, worked part-time as a florist. She made beautiful centerpieces and always smelled like lilies and hairspray. My dad, Richard, was a high school football coach, the kind who believed in firm handshakes and winning games more than he did in heart-to-hearts or bedtime stories. And then there was Jason. My younger brother by 2 years, but treated like the crown prince. He was loud, charming, reckless, and somehow always managed to land on his feet. He got caught stealing once. Mom said the store was probably mistaken. He crashed his car at 17, Dad laughed, and bought him a newer one. For safety. He dropped out of college to become a social media lifestyle influencer, and my parents practically built a shrine to his brand. I, on the other hand, went to nursing school, got my RN license. Married Mark, a kind and gentle man who didn't set off fireworks in my parents' eyes but loved me in quiet, steady ways that saved me more times than I could count. We bought a modest home. We didn't make a scene. I thought maybe, just maybe, when I became a mother, things would change. Maybe holding their first grandchild in their arms would awaken something in my parents, some long-dormant warmth, some pride they hadn't felt for me before. But I never got that moment. Because Eliana came early. Too early. 24 weeks. 1 pound, 3 ounces. And then gone. 37 hours. That's all the time I had with her. They never came to the hospital. Not when I went into labor, not when I called crying from the NICU, not when I told them Eliana might not make it. My mom's voice, when I called her the second time, still plays in my head like a bad dream. "Oh, honey, we're just getting set up for Jason's big birthday. Can we talk later? You know how stressed he gets before hosting." Jason was turning 30. Eliana was dying. You tell me what matters more. That's why I'm telling this story. Not because I want your pity, but because I know someone out there has stood exactly where I stood, grief in one hand, betrayal in the other, and a heart that can't decide whether to shatter or harden. And if you've ever felt like the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most, then you already know how this story begins. But what I want you to see, what I need you to know, is how it ends. Because I didn't stay broken. I didn't let them forget. And I sure as hell didn't forgive them, not until they understood exactly what they'd thrown away. I made sure they regretted it. And by the end of this, I promise you they did. It began with a single notification, just a soft chime from my phone that barely pierced the silence of the hospital room, where the machines hummed and beeped around me like a distant orchestra I was no longer a part of. I had turned off most notifications by then. Too many pity messages, too many polite condolences from people who didn't really know what to say, but for some reason, I hadn't silenced the group chat my family used to coordinate everything from Thanksgiving potlucks to summer trips. Maybe I thought they'd finally ask how I was. Maybe I was still clinging to the hope that even if they couldn't be there, they could care. I wish I hadn't opened it. The message was from Jason. He always used too many exclamation marks, like he was trying to convince everyone that life was just one big celebration. It read, "It's on. Pool party at my place this Saturday. Come thirsty, come hungry, and come ready to dance. Turning 30 in style, baby. Dress code, hot. Mom's handling food, dad's bringing booze, and I've got the DJ locked in. Let's go." And then, just beneath it, like a cruel afterthought, was my mom's reply. "So excited. Can't believe our baby boy is turning 30. Cartier, I'll be there early to help set up. Emily, hope you're feeling okay. Call me if you need anything." That was 3 days after Eliana died. 3 days after I held my daughter's body in a hospital blanket, still warm but no longer breathing, whispering apologies like she could still hear me, like she hadn't already drifted somewhere I couldn't reach. 3 days after I had sat on the cold floor of my shower at home, trying to wash away the guilt, the shame, the aching feeling that I had failed her, that I had let her die inside me. And now I was reading about shrimp platters and champagne toasts and DJ playlists. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at that message like it was written in a different language, like I couldn't quite believe I was seeing it. I kept scrolling, hoping, begging to see something else. A message from Dad saying, "Let's postpone." A comment from Mom saying, "We should be with Emily." A text from Jason saying, "Guys, we can't party while my niece is being buried." But there was nothing. Just heart emojis and drink gifts, and Jason bragging about the new speakers he'd installed just in time to blow the roof off. And I remember, very clearly, in that moment, the way my chest stopped hurting. Not because the pain had gone away, no, not even close, but because something colder had replaced it. Something heavier, something final. Like a door inside me had swung shut. Mark came in quietly with 2 paper cups of tea. He sat beside me, said nothing, just looked at my face. He always knew how to read me without needing words, and when I handed him the phone and he saw the messages, he didn't ask what I was going to do. He just said, "Do you want me to call them?" I shook my head. Because I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I sent out the funeral details. A short group text, no flowers, no fanfare. Just the truth, and a location. Eliana Grace Dawson. Born the 11th of April, passed the 13th of April. Funeral service this Saturday, 10 a.m., Green Hill Cemetery, all are welcome. I stared at the message for a long time before pressing send. I knew it conflicted with Jason's party. I knew they'd see it and flinch, maybe even argue, maybe ask if it could be moved. But I wasn't going to accommodate their joy anymore. I wasn't going to tuck my grief into a corner so that my brother's celebration wouldn't be ruined. This was my daughter's goodbye, and I was done pretending like our pain didn't matter. Mom called an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't say she was sorry, she didn't offer to cancel, she just danced around the truth. "Sweetheart, I saw your message. I didn't realize the funeral would be Saturday. I just wish we had more notice. It's just Jason's party has been planned for months, and people are flying in, and, well, I'm sure you understand. But listen, your father and I will come by next week, and we can do something private. Just us. I'll bring flowers. Maybe light a candle, just let me know what you'd like." What I would like? I would like my daughter to be alive. I would like my parents to be human. I would like someone, anyone, to put my child's death above a goddamn pool party. But I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself not to scream. The day of the funeral was beautiful. That kind of cruel spring beauty that feels like mockery when your world is falling apart. The sky was cloudless. Birds chirped in the trees. Someone down the street was mowing their lawn. It smelled like cut grass and blooming cherry trees and endings. We had chosen a simple white coffin. I remember thinking how small it looked next to the headstones around it, like it didn't belong there. Like a child's toy dropped in a grown-up world. People came, friends from the hospital, some of Mark's coworkers, a few of my nursing school classmates who had driven in from out of town. They brought flowers, whispered condolences, hugged me tightly like they thought I might fall apart. But my parents never came. Jason never came. And even as I stood there, reading the little poem I had written for Eliana, even as my voice cracked and I struggled to breathe between lines, I kept glancing toward the road, hoping I'd see a familiar car, hear hurried footsteps, feel arms around my shoulders. They never came. Later, as Mark and I sat in our car, still in the cemetery parking lot, his phone lit up with an Instagram story notification. Jason had posted again. It was a slow-motion video of people jumping into his pool, laughing, splashing, holding red cups in the air. The caption read, "Turning 30 the right way, nothing but love, vibes, and the best people in my life." That was when I broke. Not with a scream, not with a sob, but with silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I looked at the phone, then at Mark, and said, "They buried her too." He blinked. "What?" I turned my face to the window and whispered, "They buried her memory. The moment they chose him over her. The moment they decided what mattered more. Because it wasn't just that they didn't come. It was that they didn't want to come. That pool party didn't happen despite the funeral, it happened instead of it. They made a choice. And that was the moment I stopped being their daughter. That was the moment I became someone else entirely." In the weeks after Eliana's funeral, the world didn't stop spinning, not even a little, not even to take a breath for me. And while everyone else went back to their routines, me, coworkers, our neighbors, even Mark in his quiet, determined way, I felt like I was trapped behind glass, moving in slow motion through a life that no longer made sense, my body showing up but my heart trailing somewhere far behind, like it hadn't made it out of that cemetery. I didn't hear from my parents again for 13 days. 13 days of silence. 13 days where my mother, who used to call me 3 times a day when I had the flu in college, did not ask if I was okay, did not check if I had eaten, did not even pretend to grieve the granddaughter she never held. Not a single word from my father either. Not a note, not a call, nothing. And then, on the 14th day, a card arrived. Not even a letter. Just a blank Hallmark sympathy card, the kind with pre-written verses in scripted font and glitter that falls off the edges, like sorrow could be softened by rhymes and silver foil. Inside, in my mother's looping cursive, were 6 words, "Thinking of you. Let us know when you're ready to talk." No mention of Eliana's name, no apology, no remorse. I stared at those words for a long time, rereading them until the ink started to blur. "When you're ready to talk." As if the burden of communication rested on me. As if I was the one who had shut a door, not the one standing outside of it, waiting to be invited back in. As if I had done something wrong. Mark found me standing at the kitchen counter, card in hand, my knuckles white. "What is it?" he asked gently, already bracing. I handed it to him in silence. He read it once, then again. Then he looked at me and said, with the kind of restrained fury only he was capable of, "Emily, they don't deserve you." But it wasn't about what they deserved. It was about what I had lost and what I would never get back. I didn't want revenge. Not yet, not then. I wanted understanding. I wanted someone to say they had failed me. I wanted to stop feeling like an afterthought in my own family. Like I was only remembered when they needed something convenient, like a casserole or a babysitter or help decorating for a baby shower that wasn't mine. So, I decided to call them. Not because I was ready, but because I needed to hear how far gone they really were. My mother answered on the second ring. "Emily," she exclaimed, too brightly, like we were picking up in the middle of a cheerful conversation, like there hadn't been a funeral or a betrayal or a coffin the size of a shoebox. "Oh, honey, I've been hoping you'd call." Her voice made my skin crawl. "Why didn't you come?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries, not even giving her a chance to pretend this was going to be easy. There was a pause. "Well, Jason's birthday was already planned," she said, like that was the entire explanation, as if timing had been the only obstacle, not love, not compassion, not the complete failure to acknowledge the grief tearing through my body. "You know how stressed he gets about those things. He puts so much effort into it. And people were flying in from all over. He would have been devastated if we missed it." I could barely get the words out. "And you think I wasn't devastated?" "Emily," she sighed, her tone turning from cheerful to slightly chastising, like I was being unreasonable, like I was making a fuss. "You know we love you. And we were going to come this week, but you didn't answer our calls, you shut us out. And you chose him over her," I said, voice trembling. "You chose his party over my daughter's funeral." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Jason is still alive, Emily." I stopped breathing. I didn't hang up. I didn't scream. I just set the phone down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. That sentence haunted me for days. Jason is still alive. That was their logic. Their rationale. Their truth. It explained everything. Every ignored milestone, every forgotten birthday, every time they showed up for him and not for me. Every time I got a pat on the back and he got a parade. Every time I needed support and they told me to be strong because he needed them more, because his life was happening, loud and messy and visible, and mine was quiet and painful and tucked away in the shadows. It wasn't just about the funeral. It was everything. It was the accumulation of years of being invisible. I thought back to the time Jason totaled my dad's truck at 19, and my parents blamed the slippery road, even though he had a bottle of vodka in the passenger seat. The time he got arrested for public intoxication in college and mom told everyone it was a misunderstanding. The time he forgot my birthday and I told myself it was fine because he always forgot, because it wasn't like he ever called me unless he needed something. I remembered every dinner where he interrupted me and no one noticed, every time I brought home an achievement and got a half-hearted good job before the conversation turned back to him. I remembered my graduation nursing school, top of my class, and how my dad left early to catch Jason's lacrosse game. I had accepted all of it. I had normalized it. I had told myself that's just how families work, that not everyone gets the same kind of love, that some people are just louder and more demanding and that's why they get more attention. But that wasn't love. That was hierarchy. That was favoritism. That was emotional negligence wrapped in polite family tradition. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to admit it. I wasn't part of their inner circle. I never had been. And no matter how much I tried to prove myself, to be helpful, kind, obedient, it would never be enough to earn what Jason was born into. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about never being let in. And so, I stopped reaching out. I didn't return the card. I didn't reply to the voicemail Dad left later that week asking if I was done being upset. I wasn't done. I was just beginning to see clearly. Because grief opens your eyes in ways joy never could. And now that I was seeing the truth, I had no intention of looking away again. Grief doesn't just steal sleep or appetite or laughter, it robs you of clarity, too. For a while, after I shut the door on my parents, everything felt suspended, like I was underwater, and every sound around me came muffled, delayed, distant. I went through the motions, waking up, brushing my hair, trying to eat, trying to breathe, but it wasn't living, not really. Mark went back to work before I did, and the house got so quiet that I found myself leaving the television on just to hear voices, even if they weren't talking to me. I sat for hours on the nursery floor, surrounded by the untouched softness of blankets and clothes and unopened diaper packs, unable to decide whether to pack everything up or keep it, as it was like a shrine, or a wound I couldn't let heal. I didn't talk to my parents, but I did hear about them. People always find ways to deliver news you didn't ask for. My Aunt Ruth called to check in, but spent 10 full minutes talking about how elegant Jason's party had been, how Donna wore this gorgeous navy jumpsuit, and how the backyard looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. "It's a shame you couldn't be there," she said, as if the reason were a dental cleaning or a scheduling conflict, not the burial of my daughter. I hung up before she could finish the sentence. The next day, I got a text from an old high school friend. "Is it true your parents didn't come to the funeral? That's cold. I thought you and your mom were close." I didn't respond, but I saved the message. Not to readjust to remember how it felt to be spoken of like a cautionary tale. I began to notice the other ways they were erasing me, too, not outright, not dramatically, but in small, unmistakable ways that told me I no longer belonged to them in the way that mattered. Jason posted a family photo on Mother's Day, him, Mom, Dad, and their dog, all smiling at brunch. The caption read, "So grateful for my tribe. Wouldn't be who I am without them." No mention of me, no seat at that table. I wasn't tagged, not even in the background. And then there was the matter of the trust fund. It came up in the most unexpected way, Mark, and I had finally begun talking about moving. The house was too full of memories, too many ghosts in too many rooms, and we both agreed that a change of environment might help us breathe again. We weren't planning anything drastic, just somewhere quieter, maybe closer to my old college town. I remembered that when I was 21, my grandparents had set aside a trust fund for men out of fortune, but enough to make a difference, maybe a down payment or the start of a new life. So I called the family attorney just to ask the status, to see how it worked. He hesitated when I asked, then said, carefully, "Emily, I thought you already knew. Your parents accessed the account last year. Said it was being transferred to handle family business." I blinked. "What business?" I asked, already knowing the answer, already tasting the bitterness before it hit my throat. There was a pause. "Jason's investment startup." Unsteady. I sat there, stunned, while he explained that because my parents had been named as trustees, they had control until I turned 35, and somewhere along the way, they decided that my brother's dream of launching a wellness app with AI-backed meal planning was more important than the future their own parents had secured for me. Without telling me. Without asking. They didn't just steal money, they stole the intention behind it. The hope, the legacy. And they handed it over to someone who had never gone without anything in his life. I confronted my mother the next day, my voice shaking as I asked her how she could justify it. She didn't even try to deny it. "Sweetheart, it's not like we took it from you," she said, as if I hadn't just told her I knew everything, as if my name on the account was some kind of suggestion. "It was a family fund. Your grandfather would have wanted to help Jason succeed. He's got a real shot at something big, Emily. You wouldn't understand, you've always been more traditional." Traditional. That word burned like acid. Because what she meant was that I was boring. Predictable. A nurse who worked 12-hour shifts and saved every penny and didn't make waves. I didn't launch businesses or throw viral parties. I didn't give them a spotlight to stand in. I was never the kind of daughter they could show off. And now that I had become something messy and grieving and angry, I had fallen even further from the version of me they could pretend to love. But it didn't end there. I found out a week later through another accidental social media post that my parents had updated their wills. Jason posted a photo of a framed document with a caption that read, "Feeling grateful today. Legacy secured. Love you, Mom and Dad." I never wanted to care about inheritance. I never wanted to be the person who kept track of who got what. But now, after everything, it hit me with a quiet, devastating clarity. They weren't just writing me off emotionally. They were making it legal. They had cut me out of the future just like they had cut me out of the past. And I realized then that I wasn't being punished for something I'd done. I was being erased for something I was. I was the mirror they didn't want to look into. I was the reminder that their love had limits. I was the wound they didn't want to acknowledge because doing so would mean accepting their own cruelty. So they decided I didn't matter. But what they didn't know, what they never seemed to understand, was that I had stopped needing their permission a long time ago. That grief had burned away the last traces of doubt in me. That I was no longer asking for a seat at their table. I was building my own. And they would feel it slowly, then suddenly that the daughter they dismissed was no longer begging to be seen. She was preparing to be remembered. In the weeks that followed, the trust fund revelation and the will update, two quiet betrayals that settled over me like fine dust, coating everything in bitterness, I found myself walking a strange line between fury and fragility, like I was made of both fire and cracked porcelain, and any wrong movement might either ignite me or shatter me completely. There was a part of me that wanted to burn everything down, to call them out publicly, to send emails to relatives with screenshots and legal documents and side-by-side comparisons of what I had lost versus what Jason had gained. But another part of me, the deeper, older part that still remembered childhood hugs and birthday pancakes and lullabies, wanted to prove them wrong by becoming more, not by sinking to their level. So I started trying to rebuild quietly, stubbornly, as if each small act of reclaiming my life was a way to scream, "I'm still here. You don't get to erase me just because you preferred someone louder." I went back to work at the hospital 3 days a week. It wasn't easy, not when I passed the maternity wing, not when I heard newborn cries from the rooms next door, but I told myself that healing required motion, and I needed to keep moving or I'd drown in stillness. My first shift back, one of the nurses slipped a hand on my shoulder during break and whispered, "We missed you, Em. We were so sorry to hear about Eliana." I blinked quickly, trying to thank her without breaking down. It was the first time anyone outside my closest circle had said my daughter's name out loud, and it felt like a blessing and a wound at once, as if her name was a thread tying me to the world again. At home, I finally packed up the nursery, not to forget, but to make space for something else. I didn't want the room to be a museum of grief, a place I tiptoed past with clenched teeth and silent apologies. Mark helped me carefully fold each blanket, each tiny onesie, and we boxed them not for storage, but for donation, because as painful as it was to let go, it was worse to keep holding onto things that made breathing harder. Still, even as I stitched my life back together one trembling seam at a time, my family remained a shadow that trailed me everywhere I went. Every time I picked up my phone, I wondered if there would be an apology, a message, even a breadcrumb of acknowledgement. I wasn't asking for perfection, I just wanted someone to see me, to say, "We know we failed you, we're sorry." But the silence continued. And then came the photo. It was a picture of my parents, smiling arm in arm with Jason and his new girlfriend, some blonde 20-something with a fitness account and a trademarked brand of collagen supplements, and the caption read, "So lucky to have family who always supports me. Couldn't do it without them." The hashtags were even worse. Number grateful. Number family over everything. Number blood is thicker. I stared at it for so long my eyes hurt. It wasn't the photo that broke me, was the realization that I had spent years shrinking myself, bending over backwards, playing nice, staying quiet, all to earn the approval of people who would never give it, because their idea of love was conditional, and I had stopped meeting those conditions the moment I started asking for more than they were willing to give. So I stopped trying to earn it. Instead, I decided to make peace with who I was without them. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. Late at night, when the world was quiet and my chest felt tight, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a blank Word document open and just pour everything onto the page: me memories, my fury, my daughter's story, the things I had never said aloud. It became a kind of lifeline, something that reminded me that I had a voice, even if they refused to hear it. Eventually, I submitted an essay to a local women's journal. It was about grief, yes, but more than that, it was about being invisible in your own family, about how painful it is to be the one who always gives while everyone else takes without hesitation or thanks. I didn't expect it to be published, but it was. And something unexpected happened. I started getting emails, messages, comments from women I'd never met who said, "I thought I was the only one," or "Your story feels like mine," or "Thank you for saying what I never could." Oh, It was the first time in years that I felt like I mattered. Not because of what I could do for someone else. Not because I was convenient or helpful or easy. But because I told the truth and someone heard it. Mark was the first person I showed the published piece to. He read it twice, then took my hand across the table and said, "You don't need them to validate you anymore. You already proved who you are." And for the first time, I believed him. But that didn't mean I didn't still crave a kind of closure. So, I took a deep breath and sent one last email to my parents. Not a plea, not a rant. Just a letter. Calm, clear, and honest. Mom, Dad, I want you to know that I'm rebuilding my life. I've gone back to work. I've found ways to carry Eliana with me. I'm doing okay. But I've also done a lot of thinking. And I realized that I kept waiting for your approval, your love, your presence just at the funeral, but throughout my life. I don't want to wait anymore. If you ever decide to acknowledge what happened not just to me, but to Eliana, door is open. But until then, I need to protect my peace. This isn't hate, this is healing. Emily. I hit send and didn't check for a reply. Because this time, I wasn't looking for a response. I was reclaiming my dignity, and that didn't require their permission. I didn't expect a reply to the letter. Not really. I had written it as a kind of farewell more than a request. A release of years of expectation and sorrow folded into polite lines. A way to finally let go of the ache that had clung to me like a second skin, but still. When my phone buzzed 2 days later and I saw my mother's name appear on the screen, my heart tightened involuntarily. The way it always did when hope threatened to resurrect itself despite everything. Her message was short. Your father and I would like to see you. Just dinner, nothing heavy, we miss you. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I knew better than to believe this was a breakthrough. I knew my parents, knew the way they operated, the way discomfort was smoothed over with wine and small talk, the way apologies were implied but never spoken, always wrapped in some vague, sanitized sentiment like, we all make mistakes, or things got complicated. But part of me thought, maybe they finally want to understand. Maybe, for once, they want to sit in the discomfort instead of running from it. So I agreed. Mark offered to come with me, but I said no. Not because I didn't want him there, God. I did, but because I knew this was something I had to do alone. I needed to face them without a buffer. I needed to look them in the eyes and say the things I had swallowed for 3 decades. We met at the same restaurant we used to go to on special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, the rare family dinner where things didn't end in someone sulking or pretending. It was the kind of place with linen napkins and low lighting, where everything smelled faintly of butter and nostalgia. They were already seated when I arrived, my mother dressed in a pale blouse I remembered from last Easter, my father in his pressed polo shirt, hands folded too neatly in front of him like he was preparing for a business meeting. They stood as I approached, and my mother moved to hug me, but I took a step back. She flinched, just slightly, then smiled too wide. You look well, she said. I'm managing, I replied, sliding into the seat across from them. The waiter came, and we ordered salmon for her, steak for him, a small salad for me that I had no intention of eating. The conversation began the way it always did: weather, work, mutual acquaintances, but I said little, letting their words fill the space until they ran out of surface to skate across. Finally, my mother set down her wine glass and folded her hands. Emily, she said gently, we wanted to see you because, well, things have gotten strained, and we want to fix that. Ha! I looked at her, and then at my father, who nodded solemnly like a priest giving a benediction. You missed my daughter's funeral, I said, quietly but clearly. My father cleared his throat. We've gone over this, Em. No, I interrupted, the tremble in my voice betraying the volcano underneath. You haven't, I have. Every day. Over and over. You missed your granddaughter's funeral, you didn't show up, and you never apologized. And then you took the trust fund my grandparents left me and gave it to Jason. And you changed your wills, and now you're sitting here like you want to smooth it over without acknowledging any of it. My mother sighed, the way she always did when she thought I was being overly emotional. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said. Jason's birthday was already set. There were so many people coming. He would have been crushed if we canceled. Then one. "And you thought my daughter's death was something I'd just get over," I said, my voice rising now, sharp and clear, as heads began to turn at nearby tables. "You picked his party over my funeral. Don't tell me it was complicated. Don't tell me you didn't mean to. You meant exactly what you did. You made a choice. Again." My father leaned forward, his voice low. "Emily, we understand that you're in pain, but we won't be shamed for supporting both our children. Jason has had his own struggles." I let out a bitter laugh, blinking back the hot sting of tears. What struggles? Losing sponsors because he posted an offensive meme? Not getting enough likes on his latest fitness reel? I buried a baby, Dad. I buried your granddaughter. And you still think he needed you more? For the first time, my mother looked uncertain. "We didn't know how to handle it," she whispered. "We didn't know how to be there for you. So you chose not to be there at all." And 26. Silence fell. Heavy. Stifling. I looked at them, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see parents, I saw people. Flawed, frightened, emotionally stunted people who had built a house on favoritism and excuses and called it love. I saw the years they had spent convincing themselves that if they kept Jason afloat, everything else would follow. I saw the walls they had built around themselves to avoid accountability. And I saw that I wasn't just outside those walls, I had never been let in. "I came tonight," I said, voice shaking but steady, "because I thought maybe you wanted to take responsibility. To look me in the eye and say, 'We failed you. We chose wrong. We're sorry.' But you can't even say her name. You can't even say Eliana." My mother opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "I'm done asking for love that comes with conditions. I'm done trying to earn a place in a family that never saw me. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and looked down at them for the last time, and not with hate, but with finality. "You'll regret what you did," I said. "Maybe not now. But one day. And when that day comes, don't say I didn't try." And then I walked out of that restaurant, into the cool evening air, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. There's a kind of grief no one warns you about, not the sharp, fresh grief that burns like fire when the loss is new, and people are still bringing you casseroles and hugging you too long and whispering that they can't imagine your pain, but the quiet kind. The grief that sneaks in like fog weeks or months later, after everyone else has gone back to their lives, and you're left standing still in the middle of yours, realizing it doesn't look anything like what you remember. It's the kind that doesn't come with tears, but with emptiness, a blank stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Wondering if you've already felt your last burst of happiness, if you've already lived the brightest parts of your story and everything ahead is just shades of gray trying to masquerade as hope. That's where I found myself after that dinner with my parents, after I'd finally said the things I had rehearsed in my head for years, after I walked away without a backward glance, thinking that maybe, finally, some part of me had claimed power. But the truth is, once the adrenaline wore off and the rush of release faded, I was left with a hollow ache that no justice could reach, because even though I had spoken my truth, I still wasn't heard, and nothing I said had changed anything. They didn't call, they didn't write. There were no follow-ups, no apologies, no cracks in their walls. Just silence. And for a while, I tried to pretend I didn't care. I tried to fill my days with work, with journaling, with small acts of reclaiming, like repainting Eliana's room into a soft shade of sage and setting up a reading nook instead of a crib. Every corner I turned seemed to lead back to her, and to them, and to the way it all unraveled so quickly. The loneliness hit hardest at night. That was when the world around me was quiet enough for the noise in my head to rise. Every memory, every regret, every imagined moment with my daughter that I'd never get to live out. I thought about what her first laugh might have sounded like, whether she would have had my curls or Mark's steady eyes, whether she would have loved books or music or dancing in the kitchen like I used to as a little girl. I thought about the birthdays we wouldn't celebrate, the scraped knees I wouldn't kiss, the sleepy whispers I'd never get to hear as she drifted off to sleep with her head on my chest. One night, I found myself on the bathroom floor, the cold tile pressing against my cheek, my body curled in on itself like it was trying to disappear. And I don't even remember how I got there. I think I'd just gone in to wash my face, but something cracked open when I looked in the mirror and saw my own eyes. Hollow and unfamiliar, like a stranger had taken up residence behind them. I slid down the wall without thinking, and then I stayed there for what felt like hours, not crying, not moving, just letting the numbness wrap around me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. Mark found me there, eventually. He didn't say anything, just knelt down beside me, his eyes full of worry and helplessness, and wrapped his arms around me like he was trying to keep me from floating away. I didn't have the words to explain what I was feeling, because there weren't any, not really. It wasn't just sadness, it was disconnection. It was standing in a room full of people and feeling like a ghost. It was being a mother without a child, a daughter without a family, a woman without a place to land. I whispered, "I feel like I don't exist anymore." And he held me tighter, but even his warmth couldn't reach the cold inside me. In the days that followed, I pulled away not just from my parents, but from everyone. I stopped returning texts, stopped answering calls from friends who wanted to check in. I avoided lunch invites, skipped my therapy sessions, shut down slowly like a flower folding in on itself at dusk. I went to work, did my job, smiled at patients and nodded politely, but inside I was hollowing out, one smile at a time. The worst part wasn't the pain, it was the isolation. The way grief made me feel like no one could understand me anymore, not really, not fully, not even Mark, who tried so hard but still had moments where his face would fall into blank uncertainty, like he didn't know how to fix me, and I hated that I was something broken he didn't know how to hold without getting cut. One afternoon, I sat in Eliana's room, what used to be her room. Now just a room with soft sage walls and a single armchair, and I picked up one of the few things I'd kept from before, a tiny knit hat the NICU nurses had placed on her head before they handed her to me that final time. I hadn't touched it in weeks. I held it in both hands and stared at it for a long time, and then, without warning, I started to sob, not the pretty, silent kind, but the full-body kind. The kind that rips through your chest like an earthquake and leaves nothing standing. I cried for her. For me. For all the versions of my life that had died along with her. And I realized something as I sat there gasping and shaking and utterly alone. This wasn't rock bottom because of what I'd lost. This was rock bottom because of who hadn't shown up. It wasn't just Eliana's death that broke me, it was the abandonment that came after. The realization that my parents weren't absent because they didn't know what to say, but because they didn't think my pain was worth showing up for. That their comfort with Jason's joy meant more to them than standing beside me in sorrow. And there's something soul-crushing about realizing you would show up for someone who would never do the same for you. That's when I knew this wasn't just grief. It was betrayal. The kind that doesn't heal with time. The kind that changes you. And in that dark, tear-soaked hour, something inside me whispered that I could either disappear quietly, or I could find a way back, not to who I was before, but to someone stronger. Someone who didn't need their permission to matter. Grief has a strange way of hardening you over time, not instantly, not like a switch flipped overnight, but gradually, like slow-forming ice spreading over water, freezing layer after layer until one day you realize that you no longer feel the cold because you've become part of it. And that's exactly what happened to me in the weeks after that dark, tear-soaked afternoon in Eliana's room, when I hit the lowest point I'd ever known and, somewhere in the depths of it, realized that no one was coming to pull me out. Not my parents, not Jason, not anyone from that family I had tried so hard to belong to. So instead of waiting, I got up. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic, cinematic moment with an empowering soundtrack playing in my head. Noise started small. I got out of bed earlier. I folded the laundry. I went back to therapy, not because I felt ready, but because I couldn't afford not to. And one morning, over coffee, Mark looked at me and said, "You seem clearer." And I nodded, Because I was not happier, not healed, but clear. And with clarity came curiosity. Because there was one thread I hadn't pulled yet, toned shadowy detail from that painful mess that kept tugging at the back of my mind, whispering that something still didn't add up. The trust fund. The inheritance. The fact that Jason had not just been favored but financially empowered to the detriment of my future. My grandparents had loved me deeply, without condition, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if they were alive, they'd be horrified by what had happened, that maybe the story I'd been told wasn't the whole truth. So, I made a call. It wasn't to my parents, they wouldn't give me anything straight. Instead, I reached out to my grandfather's old lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, who had retired a few years earlier but had always been kind to me, slipping me extra butterscotch candies when I tagged along with Dad to his office as a kid. I found his number online and called with shaking hands, half expecting him to decline to talk, but he remembered me immediately and, when I explained what I was trying to understand, he agreed to meet for coffee. We sat on a park bench on a windy Tuesday afternoon, the trees just starting to bud with early spring leaves, and he pulled a faded folder from his briefcase, flipping it open with a sigh. "Your grandfather was very clear about his wishes," he said, tapping the page with a wrinkled finger. "He created 2 equal trust zones for you, one for Jason, set to transfer in stages, beginning at age 30, assuming both of you met the criteria." I frowned. "Criteria?" He nodded. "Each fund had conditions, basic ones, really. You had to be working or in school, no criminal charges. And this was important to him, you had to have a clean financial record for at least 5 consecutive years prior to full distribution." I blinked. "And Jason met those?" Whitaker's expression twisted, and that's when I knew he didn't. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Emily, your brother defaulted on 2 private business loans last year. One of them was substantial. He was technically ineligible for the trust distribution when your parents stepped in and pushed for control. They used their power as interim trustees to access both funds, under the guise of consolidating them for a family investment, but your grandfather never authorized that kind of restructuring. In fact," he pulled out another document, yellowed at the edges. "He added a handwritten addendum before he passed. Said he wanted each of you to retain sole rights unless incapacitated or deceased." My heart thundered in my chest. "You mean," I whispered, "what they did was illegal?" "At best, deeply unethical. At worst, yes, possibly criminal, depending on how the paperwork was handled." I sat there, stunned, the air thick with the weight of revelation. They hadn't just favored Jason. They'd stolen from me, lied, manipulated legal documents under the pretense of parental authority, and betrayed a man who trusted them with his legacy. And suddenly, everything made sense, the defensive tones, the vague explanations, the way my mother had insisted it wasn't really mine, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But the worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the understanding that they had never planned for me to find out. They had assumed I'd roll over, accept it, swallow my pain, and bury it with the rest of the disappointments I'd learned to carry quietly. They didn't think I'd question it, much less dig deeper. But they were wrong. Because now I had something. Not just proof. Not just a file of dusty papers. I had purpose. I thanked Mr. Whitaker, who gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder and told me he still had contacts who'd be willing to help if I wanted to pursue this further. I promised to call him soon, though I already knew I would. I wasn't the same woman I'd been a month ago. I wasn't even the same woman who had walked into that disastrous dinner. I was done mourning the loss of a family that never really existed. Now I was fighting for the woman who had been silenced, ignored, and cast aside for too long. And if my parents thought the worst I could do was walk away, they were about to learn something very different. I wasn't walking away anymore. I was walking forward with every intention of making sure they never forgot what they did to me, or to the granddaughter they never knew. There's a different kind of power in truth, not the soft, whispering kind that asks for understanding or reconciliation, but the raw, unshakable kind that burns through every lie and forces people to look at the damage they've caused. And as I sat across from the new lawyer I had hired, Dana Brody, fierce and focused with a voice like steel and eyes that missed nothing, I realized that the only thing more dangerous than being hurt is realizing you've been underestimated your whole life. Because once that fire catches, it doesn't just light the way, it scorches everything behind you. The weeks following my meeting with Mr. Whitaker were a blur of documents, calls, late-night research, and quiet planning. Dana moved faster than I expected. Within 2 days of reviewing the original trust documents, she confirmed that my parents had acted outside the terms laid out by my grandfather, that their transfer of funds, under the pretense of family consolidation, had no legal ground, and worse, that Jason had benefited from the transfer despite not meeting the requirements due to his financial mismanagement and multiple outstanding debts. "This isn't just unethical," Dana told me, flipping through printed bank statements and signed amendments. "This is paper fraud, and if we present this in court, your parents and brother could be forced into restitution and possibly face civil charges." "Auser?" I nodded slowly, feeling that strange mix of vindication and sorrow deep in my chest, because while part of me wanted justice, another part still ached that it had come to this, that I was preparing legal action not against strangers or adversaries, but against the people who once taught me how to ride a bike and pack a lunch and tie my shoes, people who had held my hand as a child but let it go when I needed it the most. And yet, I didn't hesitate. Because I had reached the point where my pain was no longer a secret, I whispered into pillows at night. It had become something solid, something with weight, something I could hold in my hands and say, "This happened, and I will not carry it in silence anymore." I didn't tell my parents what I was planning, not immediately. Instead, I waited. I waited until Jason's media brunch, an absurd event he hosted annually to connect with his followers, complete with a rented rooftop, a catered spread, and a photographer hired solely to capture him handing out vegan cupcakes to wellness bloggers. My mother had sent me the invite in a text that read, "Would love if you could come. Maybe we can finally talk, sweetheart." As if a rooftop party full of influencers was the place to mend a shattered relationship. As if that was how healing worked. But I said yes. Because I wanted them all in one place. Because I wanted to speak where they couldn't look away. Because sometimes the only way to be heard by people who live for appearances is to ruin the performance. The day of the brunch was sunny and warm, with a light breeze that carried the scent of citrus and champagne. I arrived early, wearing a simple navy dress, no makeup, hair pulled back, not trying to impress anyone, just trying to feel grounded in my own skin. Mark offered to come, but I told him no. This was something I needed to do alone, not because I didn't need support, but because I needed them to see me fully, directly, without distraction. The rooftop was already buzzing with voices and cameras when I arrived. Jason was in the center of it all, laughing too loud, sipping something pink from a crystal glass, basking in the glow of attention like he was born in it. My parents stood off to the side, both dressed in coordinated pastels, smiling politely like the carefully curated backdrop to his success story. I walked straight toward them. My mother saw me first, her eyes widening with a flicker of nervousness before she pasted on that well-rehearsed smile. "Emily," she said, arms half extended, "I'm so glad you came." I didn't hug her. "I'm not here to celebrate," I said, my voice steady and loud enough that the people nearby turned their heads. "I'm here to tell the truth." She blinked. "Sweetheart, this isn't the time. It's the perfect time." I cut in, and then I turned to Jason, who was watching with mild annoyance, probably irritated that the attention had momentarily shifted away from him. "Did you tell them," I asked, loud enough now that several guests were going quiet, "that you defaulted on 2 loans before Dad and Mom gave you my trust fund? Did you tell them that what they did violated Grandpa's wishes? That you weren't legally entitled to the money they handed you while I was burying my child?" Jason's face paled, and my father stepped forward, his voice low and warning. "Emily, this isn't the place." I looked directly at him. "You made it the place the moment you treated your son's brunch like it mattered more than your granddaughter's life. You made it the place when you stole from me. And now you're going to listen. The air was sharp with tension. People were whispering. Phones were pointed our way. And I didn't care. I continued, my voice shaking but sure. I've hired a lawyer. We have the documents. The original trust, the changes you made, the illegal transfer. This isn't just about money, this is about betrayal. You chose him over me every time, and now you're going to face the consequences of that choice. Jason sputtered. You're making a scene. I am the scene. I said, my hands trembling now. I buried a baby while you poured mimosas. I was written out of your lives, and now you don't get to write the story anymore. All. My mother's eyes filled with tears, not the kind that come from grief, but the kind that come from being caught, from the shame of exposure. People were staring. Some were filming. But I didn't flinch. I turned around and walked toward the exit, my chest heaving, not from regret but from release, because I had finally done what they never expected. I stood up not just for my daughter, but for the girl I used to be, the one who spent her life wondering if love was something she had to earn, the one who finally realized that telling the truth is not a betrayal, it's a reclamation. And as I stepped onto the street below, the sun still warm on my face, I smiled not because everything was fixed, but because it was finally real. And from that moment on, I was done playing small. In the days after the brunch, everything that had been boiling beneath the surface finally erupted, not just emotionally, but legally, tangibly, in black and white filings, and notarized letters and emails that began with, as counsel for Miss Emily Dawson, and ended with polite but unmistakable threats of litigation. And it was in those moments, sitting in Dana's office as she explained the steps ahead with calm precision, that I felt a shift inside myself, like a lock finally turning in a door I had been banging on my entire life, and behind it wasn't just justice, it was clarity. It was proof that I had never been crazy or dramatic or too sensitive, that what they did was real, that it had weight, and that I was finally taking some of that weight off my own chest and placing it where it belonged. My parents didn't respond immediately, but Jason did first with a condescending text. Really, Em? You're gonna drag our family name through the mud? Then, a flurry of calls I didn't answer, then a vague, defensive Instagram post about snakes in the grass, and how some people let grief make them vindictive. I let it all pass without response, because nothing he said could cover the truth now. Dana filed a formal complaint and began proceedings to demand restitution for the trust fund, citing not just misappropriation, but breach of fiduciary duty. She also filed for a court injunction to freeze any further transfers or use of family assets pending investigation. It got messy quickly. My father's business partner pulled out of a major deal. My mother's charity committee asked her to take a step back until the matter is resolved. Jason's so-called wellness brand lost a sponsorship deal once news spread that he had received a trust fund he wasn't entitled to while simultaneously bragging about being self-made. And through all of it, I said nothing publicly. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. But the most unexpected moment came a few weeks later, when a letter arrived in the mail, not an email, not a voicemail, but a real letter, handwritten in my mother's familiar script on cream-colored stationery I recognized from her drawer at home. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it, uncertain whether it would be another attempt to guilt me or gaslight me, unsure if I even wanted to see her words. But when I finally unfolded the page, something inside me stilled, because for the first time in years, she didn't dance around the truth. Emily, I don't know how to defend what we did, because I've been trying to defend it for so long that I lost sight of the fact that it wasn't defensible at all. You're right. We failed you. We abandoned you when you needed us most. I let my fear of facing your pain become more powerful than my instinct to comfort you. I let your father lead with logic when we should have led with love. And worst of all, I stood by while we erased your daughter from the family we claimed to cherish. You were right to fight back. You were right to walk away. I don't know if we can ever undo what we did, but I hope someday you'll believe that I finally understand what it cost you. And I am so sorry. Mom. I didn't cry when I read it. I just sat there quietly, letting the weight of those words wash over me, not as a fix, not as forgiveness, but as recognition. As the thing I had needed most since that awful day they chose a pool party over my daughter's funeral. To be seen, to be heard, to be believed. A week later, Dana called to tell me that my parents had agreed to settle. The trust would be restored in full, along with additional damages. Jason would be removed from the will. And while no court ruling could make up for the pain, for the silence, for the absence at Eliana's grave, it was enough. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted the truth to leave a mark as deep as the wound they gave me. And now, it had. There's a strange, almost surreal quiet that comes after the storm and's not, the kind of silence that signals emptiness or absence, but the kind that settles around your shoulders like a soft blanket after you've been cold for too long, wrapping you in something you didn't know you could still feel relief, maybe, or closure, or the simple, precious gift of being able to breathe without pain clinging to every inhale. And that's what the weeks after the settlement felt like for me. Not triumphant, not joyful, but still, and safe, and enough. I didn't announce the outcome to anyone. I didn't post about it, didn't send emails, didn't forward the letter my mother sent me to curious relatives who had suddenly started asking how I was after months of silence. But I did light a candle in Eliana's room, now fully transformed into my sanctuary, a place of quiet strength where her presence still lingered in the light, in the air, in the love I had poured into every corner, and I sat with her that night and whispered, "We did it, baby girl. We didn't let them erase you." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept through the night without dreams. Mark and I finally moved, not far, just a town over, but the new place had a wide porch and a backyard with tall oaks that rustled in the evening breeze like they were whispering stories only the trees remembered. And I found comfort in the rhythm of new beginnings, planting flowers with my hands in the soil, painting walls in warm earth tones, watching the way the sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows each morning as if it were trying to remind me that life goes on. And even broken things can grow again if you give them enough light. We didn't talk much about my family anymore, not because we were avoiding it, but because there was nothing left to figure out. No more wondering or analyzing or hoping for something different. The wound had scarred, the line had been drawn, and in that space they used to fill, there was now something stronger. Self-respect and clarity, and the quiet power that comes from knowing you survived something meant to shatter you. Sometimes, grief still found me. Sometimes, in the grocery store, I'd pass the baby aisle and feel a lump rise in my throat so fast I had to turn away. Sometimes, when I heard a little girl laugh, my chest would tighten with longing so fierce I could barely keep walking. But I let the tears come when they needed to, not as weakness, but as proof that I loved her, that I always would. I began volunteering at a women's support group, sitting in circles with other women who had been overlooked, betrayed, discarded by people who were supposed to love them, and I shared pieces of my story, not the legal battle, not the public scenes, but the truth beneath it all. The quiet desperation of wanting to be seen, the ache of motherhood interrupted, the strength it took to stand back up and say, "I deserve more." And every time someone nodded with tears in their eyes, I knew that this pain wasn't wasted. It was being transformed. It was reaching someone else. And in that quiet, in that giving, I found something I never thought I'd feel again. If someone had told me a year ago that I would survive the death of my daughter, the betrayal of my family, the theft of something meant for my future, and still be standing here with my heart intact, not unscarred, but intact, I don't think I would have believed them, because when you're in the middle of pain that big, it stretches so far in every direction that you can't imagine ever getting out of it. Can't imagine a day when breathing feels effortless or when the ache in your chest doesn't feel like your whole identity. But time, when paired with intention, has a way of healing things you don't think can be healed, not by erasing the past but by reshaping your understanding of it. I used to believe that family was a bond you couldn't break, that love from your parents was supposed to be automatic and unconditional. That loyalty was something you owed just because of shared blood, but what I've learned, painfully and slowly, is that love without accountability is manipulation. That loyalty given to people who repeatedly choose to harm you isn't noble, it's self-betrayal, and that sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to walk away from the very people who taught you how to tie your shoes or cross the street or say please and thank you. Because if they don't see you when you're breaking, if they can't stand beside you when you're on your knees, then maybe they were never holding you at all. They were just holding on to their version of you. I don't regret the confrontation. I don't regret the letter I sent or the legal fight or even the public silence that followed. Because all of it was part of a process I needed to go through to become the woman I am now, a woman who doesn't shrink to make others comfortable, who doesn't sit quietly in her own erasure, who doesn't accept guilt in place of grief or silence in place of truth. Eliana changed me, not just because she existed and then was gone, but because in the brief, beautiful hours I held her, I felt the most honest version of myself, a mother who would have done anything to protect her child. A woman who knew, without doubt, that love had to be more than a word people throw around when it's easy. Her life, though short, made me fierce. Her death made me unflinching. I carry her with me now in every boundary I set, in every moment I speak when I used to stay quiet, in every time I choose truth over harmony, because if I let them silence me again, if I let them rewrite what happened to protect their comfort, then I would be letting them erase her too, and I won't do that, not ever. To anyone reading this, listening to this, walking through their own valley of grief or betrayal or quiet desperation, please know that your pain is not too loud, your truth is not too much, your anger is not a flow, it's a compass, pointing you toward the parts of yourself that need protecting. And if the people around you won't stand with you in your pain, you have every right to walk away without apology, to choose yourself, and to begin again. Because you are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are what survived it. And that is more than enough.